All right, welcome everyone. Today we're going deep, really deep into the year 536.
536.
Yeah, you heard that right. 536.
Mm.
You think you've had a bad year? Well, imagine an entire year, actually more like 18 months straight, where the world is plunged into darkness. That's what
What?
happened in 536.
That's crazy.
And a lot of historians actually call this, get this, the worst year in human history.
Really. The worst year.
That's what they're saying. And today, we're going to explore why. So get ready to dive into historical accounts, scientific data, all of that good stuff. We'll even touch on what a year like this would mean for us in the modern world, just for fun.
That sounds pretty fascinating.
Oh, it is. It is. Now, what I find so intriguing about 536 is that it remained a historical mystery for centuries.
Yeah.
We had all these accounts describing a mystery cloud just poof, blotting out the sun.
Right.
But nobody, and I mean nobody, could figure out what caused it.
That makes sense.
So let's unpack this whole mystery cloud thing, shall we? What was it actually like to live through something like this?
Well, picture this. The sun is so dim, it basically resembles the moon.
Whoa.
I mean, that's how the Byzantine historian Procopius described it.
Procopius.
Yeah, he wrote about a sun that basically gave off this weak light without brightness.
Wow.
And this went on for a whole year.
That must have been incredibly eerie.
Yeah.
Almost like, I don't know, living in a constant twilight zone.
Right, exactly.
And it wasn't just like one little region.
No, not at all. This darkness stretched all the way from Europe, across the Middle East, and even into parts of Asia. We've got Irish chronicles talking about famine during this period, Chinese records mentioning summer snow, snow in the summer. That's not right.
Bizarre.
Yeah. And then we've got texts in the Middle East, describing widespread suffering, crop failures, the whole 9 yards. This was a full-blown global crisis.
A global crisis in 536. It's hard to even wrap my head around the scale of something like that. What did people back then think was happening? Like, did they have any explanations for this prolonged darkness, this never-ending night?
Well, you've got to remember, this was a time when people often, almost always, attributed natural events to divine will. So I can only imagine that this darkness must seem like some sort of apocalyptic omen.
Right, like the end of times.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so let's get down to the science of it all. Our sources point to volcanoes, fiery mountains as the possible culprit here.
Volcanoes.
Volcanoes. What do we actually know about that connection?
Well, the prevailing theory among scientists and historians is that a series of, and we're talking massive here, volcanic eruptions spewed enough ash into the atmosphere to create this global fog, this blanket of darkness.
Okay.
And they think a massive eruption, like a really big one, in Iceland, of all places, is the most likely suspect.
Iceland. So not exactly what comes to mind when you think, volcano, right?
Not your typical tropical island volcano.
Right.
But here's the thing. It's not so much about the location,
Okay.
It's about the sheer volume of ash that gets blasted into the atmosphere.
Got it.
These eruptions, they can trigger something called a volcanic winter effect.
Volcanic winter.
It's basically like a massive dust cloud just hanging out up there, blocking out the sun's rays.
Ah, I see. Blocking out the sun, hence the darkness.
Right.
But how do we even know this happened so long ago? Like, do we have any tangible evidence, any physical proof to back up these theories?
We do, actually. Scientists have been studying ice cores from Greenland and Antarctica, samples taken from ancient glaciers.
Right.
These ice cores are like little time capsules.
Cool.
They'll trap particles, air, all sorts of stuff from the atmosphere as they form layer by layer over time.
Mm-hmm.
And in cores dating back to, you guessed it, 546, they found sulfate deposits. And that's a major, like a smoking gun indicator of significant volcanic activity.
So we're not talking about campfire stories here. We're talking real, hard, scientific evidence.
Exactly. Real evidence.
But okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. How did this ash cloud actually impact people's lives, beyond the obvious lack of sunlight?
Well, the lack of sunlight caused temperatures to plummet and growing seasons to, they were basically cut short.
Shorter seasons, less food.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that meant widespread crop failures. Think about it. In the 6th century, you couldn't just, swing by the grocery store when your pantry was running low.
No Instacart back then.
No Instacart. People were totally, and I mean totally, dependent on local agriculture for their survival.
Right.
Wheat, barley, rice, all the staples, just devastated.
Wow.
And you can imagine the desperation, the hunger, the struggle. Some historical accounts even mention, and this is pretty grim, instances of cannibalism.
Really?
Yeah. It's a chilling reminder of just how desperate people were.
That paints a pretty stark picture. And on top of all this, our sources also mention a devastating plague that emerged around the same time. This wasn't just a bad year, it was like a full-blown catastrophe.
You're talking about the Plague of Justinian, named after the Byzantine emperor who was ruling during this whole period.
Plague of Justinian.
It first popped up around 541 AD, just a few years after this whole period of darkness began. Now, to understand this, you need to know a little bit about the Byzantine Empire. They were basically the Eastern Roman Empire, a major power at the time, and the plague hit them hard, really hard.
Okay.
And the thing is, all the darkness and the famine that followed, it would severely weaken people's immune systems,
Yeah.
made them incredibly vulnerable to disease.
So basically the perfect setup for a pandemic.
Exactly, a perfect storm. And the Plague of Justinian was caused by this bacterium called, are you ready for this? Yersinia pestis, the same one that caused the Black Death in the 14th century.
Wait, so the same bacteria caused two of the most devastating pandemics in history.
That's right. It's a pretty grim reminder of how connected our world really is, even across centuries.
Yeah.
And the plague, it most likely originated in Egypt and spread rapidly through all the trade routes, eventually reaching Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire.
Oh, wow. And what happened when it hit Constantinople?
Imagine, just picture this, bodies piling up in the streets, utter chaos. Historians estimate the plague killed somewhere between 30 and 50% of the city's population during that initial outbreak.
That's almost incomprehensible. So we've got darkness, famine, and now a deadly plague. It's no wonder historians consider 536 one of the worst years in history.
Yeah.
But it also had some pretty far-reaching consequences, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. All of this, the famine, the plague, the social and economic turmoil, it all significantly weakened the Byzantine Empire.
So not only was it a terrible time to be alive, but it also reshaped the political landscape. How exactly did this weakening play out? What were the specific consequences for the Byzantine Empire?
Well, they lost a lot of territory, important land.
Yeah.
The empire had already been under pressure from groups like the Sasanian Empire to the east.
Right, right.
And, with the Byzantines being so weak, it gave these groups a chance to gain some ground.
Ah, I see. So it's kind of like one problem leads to another.
Exactly.
And then another, and before you know it, the whole system is just like teetering on the edge.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
It's just wild to think about, how much one volcanic eruption could impact, well, the entire course of history.
Yeah, it really highlights how connected everything is.
Yeah.
And, it raises some pretty important questions for us today.
Okay, yeah. This feels like a good time to shift gears a bit.
Sure.
It's been a lot of doom and gloom so far.
Yeah, for sure.
But what can we learn from all this? Is there a bigger takeaway here, beyond volcanoes are bad?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
The events of 536, as horrible as they were,
Yeah.
they offer some really crucial insights into just how interconnected our world truly is. They show us how a seemingly distant event, a volcanic eruption way over in Iceland,
Right.
it can create these ripple effects that impact societies across the globe, across continents.
It's like that butterfly effect thing.
Yeah, exactly.
But on a massive scale.
Exactly, a massive scale.
And I mean, we might not face a volcanic winter of that magnitude again today,
Yeah.
but we're definitely not immune to the forces of nature.
No, not at all.
Think about that Mount Pinatubo eruption back in 1991.
The one in the Philippines.
Yeah, that's the one. It was a big deal, wasn't it?
It was a big deal.
I remember hearing about it.
While it wasn't, as catastrophic as what happened in 536,
Yeah.
it definitely had global consequences.
Really?
The eruption spewed massive amounts of sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere,
Wow.
which led to a temporary cooling of the planet and disrupted weather patterns all over the world.
So even with all our modern technology, all our fancy gadgets and global connections,
Right.
we're still at the mercy of Mother Nature.
We are, yeah.
That's a humbling thought.
It is.
And as we face all these challenges with climate change and everything,
Right.
the lessons from 536, well, they become even more relevant, don't they?
They do.
Understanding how societies in the past coped with such extreme environmental upheaval.
Yeah.
It could give us some valuable clues for how we might, navigate similar challenges in the future, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So what you're saying is there's hope. We're not all, doomed.
Doomed. No, not at all.
Okay, good.
What's remarkable about human history,
Yeah.
is our resilience, our ability to adapt, to innovate,
Right.
even in the face of adversity.
Yeah.
The people who lived through 536 and all the aftermath,
Yeah.
they eventually rebuilt their lives, their societies.
Yeah.
They learned to adapt to the new conditions,
Makes sense.
developed new ways of, well, new ways of living.
That's really reassuring to hear.
It is. It is.
We've gotten through tough times before,
We have.
and we can do it again.
We can.
The key is to learn from the past, right?
Yes.
To be aware of the risks and to take steps to mitigate them.
That's it. Yeah.
We have the knowledge, we have the technology
We do.
to make a difference,
Yeah. Absolutely.
to build a more resilient future, a more sustainable future.
That's the goal.
I think this is a good spot to bring our listeners back into the conversation.
Okay. Yeah.
What do you think out there? Knowing what we now know about just how fragile our world can be,
Mm-hmm.
what steps can we take, individually and collectively,
Right.
to prepare for potential future challenges?
That's a great question. A really important one.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From volcanic winters and pandemics to the resilience of, the human spirit.
Yeah.
It's been quite a journey.
It has been a journey.
And, I think it's worth remembering
Yeah.
that while 536 may have been one of the worst years in history,
It was a rough one.
it's also a testament to our ability to endure,
For sure.
to adapt,
Yeah.
and to ultimately overcome even the most daunting challenges. Like, what's that saying? What doesn't kill you?
Makes you stronger.
Yeah, that's the one.
Well, hopefully we won't have to face anything quite as devastating as 536 to prove that point.
Right.
But I think the principle holds true.
On that note of cautious optimism,
Cautious optimism. I like it.
we've reached the end of our deep dive into
Like
536.
fascinating year.
A huge thank you to all our listeners for joining us on this journey through, one of history's darkest
Yeah.
and most fascinating chapters.
It's been a pleasure.
And remember, if you ever start to feel like, you're having a bad year, just think back to 536. It might just help put things in perspective.
It might. It might.
It really puts things in perspective, doesn't it?
It does. Yeah.
As we wrap up our deep dive into 536,
Mm-hmm.
what stands out to you as the most important takeaway from all of this?
I think for me,
Yeah.
it's the reminder that history,
Yeah.
it isn't just a bunch of random events.
Yeah. Right.
It's more like this complex tapestry
Okay.
where everything's interconnected.
Mm.
Environmental changes, social structures, political power.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's all intertwined, often in ways we don't even realize.
It makes you think about how even small events, seemingly insignificant things,
Right.
can have these huge ripple effects
Hmm.
that end up changing the entire course of history.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a pretty powerful insight,
It is.
especially as we face all the challenges of the 21st century.
Exactly.
We can't afford to think in isolation anymore.
Yeah. We got to consider the bigger picture, the long-term consequences of our actions,
Mhm.
both individually and collectively, right?
Should absolutely.
So in a way, the story of 536,
Yeah.
it's not just about the past.
It's a lesson.
It's a cautionary tale,
It is.
but it's also, as you said earlier, a story of hope
Yeah.
and resilience.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that even when faced with seemingly insurmountable challenges,
Right.
humanity has this remarkable ability to adapt,
Yeah.
to innovate,
We do.
to find a way forward.
We find a way.
Absolutely.
And who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe by learning from the past,
Mhm.
maybe we can avoid repeating some of the worst mistakes.
That's the hope.
Yeah.
Well, on that note,
Okay.
we've reached the end of our deep dive into 536.
The year of darkness.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating
It has.
and somewhat sobering journey.
Yeah.
A huge thank you to all of our listeners for joining us. Thanks for listening, everyone.
And remember, if you ever start to feel like you're having a bad year, just remember 536.
Remember 536.
It might just help put things into perspective.
It might.
Until next time, stay curious, keep exploring,
Keep learning.
and we'll see you on our next deep dive.